Shea O'Keefe. She will be presenting today on riparian restoration as it pertains to Southern California's diverse ecotypes. Shea is our Area 4 biologist with the USDA, NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Services. And she's serving San Diego, Orange, Riverside, Imperial, San Bernardino, Los Angeles, and Ventura counties. Shea received her Bachelor's of Science in Biology with an emphasis in zoology and a Master's of Science in Evolutionary Biology from San Diego State University. Shea's graduate work assisted wildlife corridor functionality in San Diego using non-invasive sampling methods and population genetics. And over the last 15 years working with NRCS, she has worked on projects involving riparian and upland restoration, including forest lands and grazelands, pollinator habitat, and restoration of sensitive habitats for listed species. This work has facilitated successful partnerships with regulatory agencies, local governments, land conservancies, and private landowners. Today, Shea will be discussing the specifics of riparian restoration as it pertains to Southern California, including coastal, foothills, mountain, and desert ecotypes, and how this effort can benefit both wildlife and working lands. All right. Shea, you're welcome. We're excited to have you.
Thanks. So I'm assuming you can see my first page here. And I have control. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to move right along here because we are a little bit low on time. So yes, the topics today is going to be about riparian areas. And first I'm going to talk about a little bit about why they're important. And then we'll talk about the obstacles and opportunities that I've faced down here in Southern California. A couple case studies, and then we'll finish up with some lessons learned. So why are riparian areas important? Well, first of all, to define it, it is that transitional area between the upland and aquatic in the water systems, and it can exhibit characteristics of both types of habitats. So why are they important? Well, like Brandy said, I studied corridors for a few years here, and they are very important as those types of movement habitats for wildlife, as well as stopover points as wildlife are migrating across the landscape. So providing that food, cover, and water. It's especially important in California as we're starting to respond to, or have been responding to, climate change and the shifting habitats. Some things are moving higher in elevation, some things are blinking out. So in the face of climate change, riparian areas kind of offer that safe refuge of movement between those changing habitats. On a more utilitarian perspective, and maybe speaks to this conference in terms of soil and water, the vegetation in riparian areas does stabilize stream banks, reduces that floodwater velocity, so allows sediment deposition, minimizing erosion, as well as groundwater replenishment. So allows that water to slow down and infiltrate into the groundwater again. So on to some of the obstacles and opportunities that I have down here. Primarily, it's invasives. So I know there are some functional perks to some invasives like pollinators, but when you have them in riparian areas down here, it's not a good scene. So the ones that we deal with the most down here is arundo, which is that giant cane, looks kind of like a sugar cane or giant reed. Tamarisk is a huge issue down here, and it does utilize a whole bunch of water, not because the plant itself uses a lot of water, but because it's so dense in its growth that it does suck up a lot more water than, say, a native diverse vegetated landscape. Eucalyptus trees are also a major offender down here in riparian areas. I know we love them for their oils and their smells, and they do provide good perching habitat, but once they get into a riparian area, they tend to take over. And then we have a whole host of other, I guess, more herbaceous invasives like perennial pepperweed, which is almost impossible to get rid of, fennel, vinca, Cape ivy, castor bean, there's a ton of them. So that's one of the biggest obstacles that we have down here. And some people see this as an obstacle, but I see it more as an opportunity. So Southern California, these are dated maps, but they do tell a really good picture of why California riparian habitats are so important. We do have a high number of, this blue graph on the left tells you the total number of species per state. And you can see we're pretty dark blue there in California. And then the number of endemics, so species that exist here and nowhere else. California is the darkest of the states there, so the most endemics are in California. And then in terms of species at risk, everybody wants to live in California, so that starts decreasing population levels of species. So you start getting more at-risk species and hence more listed species. So again, it can be an obstacle when you're trying to do restoration, but it is an opportunity to do wonderful things for species that may not be doing well, that you have an opportunity to improve their habitats. So that's kind of why I got in the game. The species that are listed down here, the most prevalent ones that I get to have an opportunity to work with. Leaf-spells vireo, federally and state endangered, doing very well though down here, a good bump in the populations over the last couple years. Southwestern willow flycatcher, kind of its sister bird, same types of habitats, not doing so well though, but still a riparian bird that we're focused on, especially under our Working Lands for Wildlife initiative. Those two birds are also migratory, so we have a chance to work around their breeding system. Arroyo toad and mountain yellow-legged frog, also riparian dominant species, but they are residential, so they are a little trickier to work around as they don't migrate out of the area, but they do burrow down into the soil, and there's definitely some avoidance measures that have to be employed when working with them. And then out in the deserts, we have the desert pupfish. Again, it's an aquatic species, but within the riparian zone. A little bit more on obstacles and opportunities. And as I do this job year by year, I seem to come up with a few more of them. Fire is a big one down here, as now in the rest of the state and in the western states, really. San Diego was the first to go through these types of large landscape level flat fires in 2003. In 2007, we had the Witch Creek and the Cedar Creek fires, both burned close to 250,000 acres. So we were the first to kind of have these big monstrous type fires, and riparian areas were systems where those fires kind of wicked through and were able to spread so fast. So balancing fuel reduction and soil retention with habitat is a big obstacle. Also, limitations of the landowner, and us working with NRCS and Working Lands, we find that we need to make sure that we know those limitations of who we're working with. And in terms of riparian restoration, that can be irrigation, availability of irrigation. Do we have it? Do we don't? And then plant availability is another one that I find as being kind of a limitation if you're not really ahead of your restoration game. The human factor is huge, and a lot of these riparian areas are under the public eye within neighborhoods, people living around these zones, and they're usually large-scale restorations. So the educational opportunity is there to tell people why we're removing your beautiful eucalyptus heritage tree that's been on the registry since 1940. Not a lot of people like to see those trees being removed, but we try and strike a balance between those that want them for shade trees and, again, heritage trees, and those that are really causing a problem in the riparian zone. And then the last one I was going to talk about is this changing precipitation factors. So this graph shows variability. So if you look at it since maybe mid-1980s, 1990s, we've had this huge increase in precipitation variability, meaning that we're not able to really count on rains coming at a certain time of year at a certain level. So we're getting these big rain events and then they're over, and then we get big dry spells. So that's been really challenging in terms of how we plant and how well our riparian area is going to be successful. So I did want to touch a bit on reference sites and existing conditions. Again, this is a lot of anecdotal stuff, and I know Corey had some great graphs and data. I am going to speak more on the kind of the, what I've seen work and what hasn't worked. And again, restoration is to me where art meets science and proven methods. So it's a little bit of both when you're out there. So you want to try to determine what the historic and potential conditions are in these riparian systems. So what's your reference site? And that's, I try and start there, but oftentimes these areas are so disturbed that you might not be able to find something like that. But this is where something like Google Earth and going back into the history all the way back to maybe the 1950s, 1960s, even earlier, possible to see what that system looked like. And is that even possible now with maybe the surrounding development? You want to help determine the benchmark conditions, what it should look like. And again, our WAGs are a great tool for trying to define out those elements that are limiting to wildlife in our riparian system. We have some really good riparian WAGs that we use. And then you want to look at the least impaired conditions versus the most impaired. So that's where you want to look. You want to survey wide, big landscape level maps to see what's going on within that watershed. Native versus non-native, site and off-site. So that means you really want to, you're looking at your site, and oftentimes you get a landowner that's like, hey, this is the section that I really have control over. But before you start making recommendations and putting in dollars, you want to see what's going on upstream as well as downstream, and is what they want to do even possible. So even though you're addressing that 90% cover of a rundo, maybe there's a huge population upstream where you're never going to get where you need to be. And then the conditions of the stream banks on site and off site as well. What's going on with the erosion? Is it on site? Is there something going on upstream, off site, or downstream? So you want to try and get an idea of what's going on with the stream banks on that watershed again. So these are the 3 sites that I'm going to talk about. I had some desert stuff in there, and then I had to kind of get this out the door quicker than I wanted to. So I'm going to be really talking about 3 sites. One is a coastal site on the San Diego River. The other one's more of a foothill site up in Riverside County. And then we're going to go up into the mountains in San Bernardino to look at a riparian restoration up there. Oops. So this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Eucalyptus is the bane of my existence, quite honestly. I drive by this, I used to joke, the field office is in Escondido and I live in Encinitas, and I drive this route and I'd stare at this stand of eucalyptus trees and really want to get rid of them. And one day in 2007, it decided to burn, and that was the Cedar Creek fire. Maybe it was the Witch Creek fire, I can't remember. Anyway, we were evacuated and I was hightailing it home, and that fire was basically coming through the riparian zone. The cars were pretty jammed up and I'm trying to get home, and it's flying through this section of the river. And why was it flying through this section of the river? Because these trees are very flammable. So it burned quickly within, I think, 10 miles. It was a 45-minute movement from point A to point B. So but that was a fantastic opportunity to do some restoration because a lot of the biomass was removed in the fire. Yay. So NRCS was able to get in there and start doing some work. So you can see in the top picture, this is called the Dios Gorge, but it's the San Diego River. Up the darker picture on the far right is back in 2008. This is probably 3 months after the fire came through. Still a good stand of eucalyptus, but believe it or not, a lot of the biomass was burned. And you can see this is called the lemon twist fruit stand right here. And that's just the framing of it after that fruit stand burned. But this is an oak tree right here for reference. And then really what we did is for this riparian zone, we did some cut stump and tree girdling. So the trees that we could remove, they were removed, but there's a road here. You can see here it is here, and there's power lines. So a lot of these trees couldn't be removed. So many of them were girdled. And as long as they were going to fell in the right direction and not across the road. And then a lot of them were cut stumped. So again, here's this oak again for reference. So this was March of 2013. And then again, no planting in this area. So that's when you want to think about what kind of native seed bank do I have? Is there existing natives in here that could have what's called competitive release? after you remove this canopy of eucalyptus trees. So in September 2015, right here, the fruit stand got rebuilt, and you can see all these willows coming through. It looks fantastic now, and we're pretty proud of this project. So you can see now the eucalyptus are just dead standing snags, basically, that offer also wildlife habitat for raptors. So the trees that we girdled are now utilized by wildlife. Okay. So I'm going to move on. This is the Meadowview project. This is the one up in Riverside, and this was a huge partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program, Jonathan Snapcook, the Meadowview HOA with Terry Biancardi, who is fantastic, BOR, Riverside County Flood Control, AmeriCorps, City of Temecula, and Sky Mountain Permaculture. So big effort from many partners on this. And basically this started out with overgrazing, and they did, the HOA was overgrazing out there with sheep because they were afraid of fuel load. So fire being a big concern out there, they had these sheep out there and they were grazing, and then, oh dear, there goes the riparian area, and we've got major big, those unpredictable rain events. Just a deluge of rain came through. And the stream banks started to erode quite massively. And this was triggered with the HOA asking for help because they actually lost a little boy down there. And so they were like, wow, we gotta do something here. So we came in with some major engineering. Heijin out of Oxnard did some fantastic engineering designs. And you can see this is the road. There's quite a bit of urban runoff that gets funneled through this area, and then you get a lot of vegetation that's established at the very base of this. The water's going this way though, going up the graph or up the design. And then you've got these massive bank erosions on the side. So you can tell there's a lot of velocity moving through this. These are these these are earthen berms, and then she's got a really cool rock drop structure here, as well as stream barbs that went in. So a lot of thought went into this engineering design. Here's a cross section of these stream barbs here. So is it going to work? I don't know. Well, let's see what happens here. Here's again the huge bank, vertical banks here. Lots of failures going on. Very dangerous situation. We came in and we sloped it back at a 3-to-1. You can see here is the start of one of those stream barbs. And then after it was sloped back, you can see one of the barbs coming all the way in, keyed very well into the slope. Again, 3-to-1 slope. Again, is this going to work? Well, we had a fantastic big rain event. We got out there. Terry was fantastic at documenting, and you can see this is one of the rock drop structures funneling the water off these slopes into the river. And we're kind of hooting and hollering there, but it's pretty cool to see something actually working that was on paper. And now, yay, it's working. Okay, I'm gonna move forward. This is a fantastic video that I did not take, but Jonathan sent it to me. So this kind of shows you the transformation of this riparian area. So here we're zooming into Temecula and Riverside. There again is that graph and that road. This is again the problem, massive erosion. Here's the design. Here's the hope and the dream here, sloping it back, vegetating the toe, getting some good vegetation cover on the side. Continuing on here, we're sloped back. We got irrigation in place. And then this kind of just shows you the before and after as we move through there. We flew a drone out there and we're able to capture. Here's that sloping back on that one side, armoring on one side here. And you can see the flow is going out here. The toe is hitting. That's why she put that armoring there, is to catch that toe right there. Continuing on, here's a stream barb. More sloping back. Here's that rock drop structure. More stream barbs. And we're moving on. So as we move forward, this is spring of 2019. We got those back slopes again. Got some toe protection here with some straw wattles. Now it's got to get the vegetation, and this is 3 years later. So it turned out quite well. We're continuing downstream now with some more restoration, not as much earth movement, but definitely some more revegetation. So now we're going to move up into the mountains, and what do I have on time? Okay, I'm going to scooch along here. So the mountains are a whole different scenario. The mountain area, riparian areas have, again, you're worried about fire, right? So Kelly Seipolt, my area forester, and I constantly banter back and forth on fuel load and wildlife habitat. I want to save all the downed wood and the snags, and she wants to see some of it removed. So it's striking a balance where you're not going to remove all the habitat for wildlife, but at the same time, you're minimizing a catastrophic wildfire, which would come in and basically throw the baby out with the bathwater. So as long as you and your fuel load forester can come to a consensus, you're in good shape. Down here too, as well as I'm sure up in the rest of the state, with these repeated fires, we get type conversion. And this is Adam Lerner. He was our forester down here years ago, and he was a big guy, like 6'5", and behind him is this Ceanothus, again, another bane of my existence type plants, where it's 100% cover. This used to be a lovely conifer forest, and due to repeat fires, it's a Ceanothus wall that you can't even get in to do a bird survey without cutting yourself up to shreds. So these are the issues that we have down here in the mountain riparian areas. Fuel load with wildlife habitat, trying to retain as much snag and downwood as possible without creating a massive fuel load issue, and then the repeat fires and type conversion. So this is again up in the San Bernardinos. This was a riparian area until a history of neglect, logging. You can see all these logs laid down in the riparian zone and misuse. Just a whole story for another time. But this area here, they reached out to us because they have mountain yellow-legged frog downstream, and flying squirrels, southern rubber bow, all kinds of cool forested creatures up here in the upland area. So again, Heijin, my wonderful engineer, came in. This isn't quite her design, but this just kind of shows you. This is a parking lot right here. So this is the very top of the watershed. And this whole area is where you just saw those logs laid down. So we were able to remove the logs. You can see here, there's no pile of debris anymore. And then we were putting in this riparian area with these catchment ponds before it got to this existing pond, and then went continuing downstream. So again, engineered for groundwater retention and water quality issues, and revegetated for wildlife habitat, erosion, and water quality. So this is after all the downed wood was removed. She starts bioengineering this, and this is what it looks like actually last year. So it's doing its job. We have some good water retention here and some great riparian and wetland vegetation coming up. So my last slide, lessons learned. The first thing I guess I could say is know your limitations. I bring out Peter Fahnenstock quite a bit, our soil scientists, to dig pits, know what my hydrology looks like on site. Is there irrigation? Is it possible? Water truck, is that possible? What's your plant availability? And is competitive release an option? Do we have to go in there and do planting? Or is there an existing seed bank or emerging vegetation that could do very well once the invasives are removed? And speaking to the invasives, you need to continually manage those invasives, either through repeat treatment. It could be mechanical, it could be chemical, it could be a combination of both. Again, if it's chemical, it's aquatic approved. Dense plantings has been very helpful. So as much competition as possible through dense native plantings. Is seeding possible with a sterile seed mix? That's what helped out that Meadowview project, is we put in a native sterile California brome to outcompete all the mustard that wanted to come up. And that kind of gave us a little edge, and then we were able to get in some container plants and really make a difference. Utilize those partnerships. NRCS can't do everything. Outreach and site monitoring sometimes can be more readily done by my partner's biologist with Fish and Wildlife. He has the ability to get out there and do all of that legwork. And then stream bank bioengineering. It's powerful, but use it wisely. It doesn't have to go everywhere. So I think that's it for me. Yes. All right. Are you guys still there?
Yes.
Okay.
That was a great presentation. Thank you, Shae. So in the chat, we have a lot of great presentations. Thank you. Wendy Rash says, fantastic project, Shae. The graphics and videos illustrate it so well. And Carl has asked if we can get a replay of the riparian area presentation.
Replay, like which part? The whole thing? You want another 20 minutes?
I think so. I think what would address this well is for Mr. Carl to know that we will have the whole thing recorded and placed on our YouTube channel. So we will have the links for that later. All right, I have a question here in the chat. Suzanne would like to know, what are natives you used for restoration in the mountain areas?
Oh, there's a whole plant list, and I could probably share that with Suzanne on the side. I have a document that I can post. Is that helpful? Okay. Yes, Suzanne, I will post that for you.
Beautiful, thank you. All right, and I see Corey's hand is up. Corey, if you'd like to take yourself off mute and ask your question, please.
Yeah, Shae, Shae, those were great examples. Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned at the end there the importance of evaluating the hydrology of a site, and I think this is something that I kind of struggle with, not knowing how to go about that. So I'm kind of curious, because particularly, when you think about, could this site support riparian vegetation? Is essentially the water table high enough to provide that, especially if a site has lost all its vegetation, doesn't have any indication by what's there? Right. How would you say you go about evaluating the hydrology of a site just to know whether it can support, species like willows or cottonwoods?
And again, if you don't have any kind of vegetation coming up to give you an indication if it's starting to make a change towards a more ripe, upland type vegetative community, Peter has been fantastic, and I have him come out at various times of the year before we do a project, because we have to wait for cultural anyway, and help me by digging some pits and looking at where the water table lies. And it can fluctuate, right? It can be great at one area and really gone at another area. So he's been very helpful at that, helping me with those. And then
those pits are done with heavy equipment. How deep are you going?
Depends. If it's accessible, he has this rig with a backhoe on the end of it. But again, that's not for every site. If it's a hike-in type situation and no heavy equipment, then we just bring in hand tools and start digging. Yeah.
Okay. Great, thank you.
And again, those Google Earth images are super helpful if it's at the right time of year.
To look for vegetation up or down the creek, yeah.
That in surface flow, yeah.
I've seen that, or I've used that technique a little bit before,
yeah.
Thank you, Corey. All right, Carly would like to know, what methods do you use to determine what your seed bank is?
Well, what methods do I use to see what my seed bank is? I don't really have a method for that, unfortunately. I'm just looking to see what's coming up, and that's why the planning process is so important. If you are doing a project that's going to be, you think, funded, give it the time and get that year-round assessment to see what's coming up in February versus September. But other than that, yeah, I'm not like collecting soil and growing out seed in a greenhouse anywhere. It's just watching your site repeatedly. And sometimes you do projects on a smaller scale. Like if somebody comes to you and says, I want to do this whole riparian area, and you're like, well, how about we start upstream and we're just going to do a little acre and see what happens, test it out, and then we can phase it. And so I do a lot of phasing with my projects just to make sure we don't go for a $300,000 project and, you know, it starts failing on you.
Sounds like you have real world knowledge on that one.
Yes.
Sorry. Carl said, can TR55 be used to evaluate the site hydrology?
Sure. I don't know. I can write that down. And TR55. I've never used that. Not sure.
All right. And Mr. Moore commented that historic Google Images assist too, and that was back when we were discussing Google Images for assessing what transition phase your habitat is in. Thank you, Tom. And Jackie would like to know, how do you decide when you are doing passive plant establishment versus direct planting at sites?
It's like a tipping off zone, right? So if you get in there and you're like, well, 50% of this is invasive and there's another 50% that's existing that's native, and I see it struggling and trying to come up, I will go with more of a passive approach. If you're scraping the ground and heavy equipment's in there and you know, you got this huge mulch now of arundo after you've chipped it in place, then we're going to go with the planting. So there's that. I'd say 50-50. If you've got 50% still existing native there that's struggling to come up, I give it a good passive heave ho. But again, doing it in phases is huge. So we can always say, let's keep the planting out of it for now, and then next year apply, and we'll see how it does. And if it does need a planting effort, then we'll put it in another contract. That's helpful.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Mr. Greg Barrett said UC Santa Barbara has an excellent aerial imagery library as well, and he provided the link there for that. So thank you very much for that input. And all right, if there are no other questions at this time, Sonia, can we pop up our contact slide list or slide for everybody to see, please? And I want to say a big thank you to both of our presenters today. It's a little bit out of our wheelhouse, what we traditionally do, but again, building this network of conservationists and just addressing all the issues we see. Everything's interconnected, and we really appreciate learning about your disciplines and the work you do. And again, we will have these recorded, and they will be up on our chapter YouTube channel in a few business days. So if you'd like to contact us, there's our email address, and our website is listed there as well. And we have Facebook. So Sonia and I take care of all of those things, and we're interested in hearing from you, any feedback or any ideas for future webinars. And we are arms wide open to new members. So if you have questions about membership, shoot those our way as well. Again, thank you very much for our presenters and all of our attendees for your time, for your attention, and for your involvement. We will end our webinar at this time, and we look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Brandy. See y'all.
Yes, thank you, Corey.